the end of the day, so you could have spent your time anywhere else. Thank you for joining us here. We are there are a few of us who will go through the content. UV would be the first one to start with, and I'll let him introduce himself. My name is Hemant. I am one of the solution architects. My actually day-to-day looks quite a bit for Elastic users on Azure, like what could we be doing next? So I'm dedicated to Azure as one of our strategic alliances. Shankar, do you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Shankar Subramaniam. I'm local in Seattle. I'm one of the solution architect from Elastic, and Microsoft is my core focus in Pacific Northwest. Thanks.
Thanks, Shankar. So there are quite a few of elasticians in the room. So as I already noticed, you folks have been striking some conversations. Continue to do so. This is a small enough group where we can keep it a lot more casual than formal. So if you have any questions, if you would like to have us focus on something a little bit more than what we are doing, feel free to stop us and interject. Same goes for the folks on the conference, web conference. Shankar is on Zoom, so if you have any questions, hopefully, Shankar, you can help us monitor the questions that are coming in, and feel free to stop us or just give us a holler. We will pause to answer those.
Sounds good. So I'll try to answer that. If not, if the answer needs to be on the mic, then I'll let you do that.
Perfect. Thanks, Shankar. Yeah, so with that, Yuvi, over to you.
It's been a while since I've last presented in public, so it may feel a bit awkward after like 2 years of non-existence, but I will try not to be awkward. So my name is Yuvraj. I go by the name of UV. I'm the senior product manager at Elastic. I manage our infrastructure and capacity across cloud. So I'm the guy, if you ever use Elastic and click on create deployment, and if you get an error that you are not able to launch due to capacity, then I'm the person to be blamed, right? And or if you're not getting the right performance you want, then you need to kind of like reach out to me to say like, hey, we need something better, right? And apart from that, I work on various other things, which include where we should launch our cloud regions, and also kind of like closely work with a lot of folks internally and externally to understand where our demand is and where should we kind of like innovate across the board, right? So we have few topics on the slides, but I want this to be an interactive session. I hate to be an orator who is just giving a speech, right? So I want to be a two-way kind of like conversation over here. So anyone at any given point of time have any questions, don't hesitate to kind of like stop me and kind of ask me, because there may be a lot of technical words which we would go through. So I want to ensure that we all are on the same page of understanding that, right? And this is particularly open for everyone who is attending in person and also on Zoom, right? So please feel free to stop me and kind of like ask clarifying questions, right? So let's see, what do we have on the agenda? Cool. So some of the housekeeping and logistics things, just for kind of like a reference. So all the attendees who are joining via Zoom, they have been automatically muted, but you can please unmute yourself or raise your hand to ask a question, and Shankar would be able to moderate that via the Zoom. Shankar, feel free to stop me if there are some questions which people have, because I cannot see what's been happening on Zoom. This is a pre-recorded session. We are recording this session, so the session would be available to everyone once the session ends, so that if you missed anything, or if you need to recap, or if you want to share it with a broader group within the company or your team, you can do that. There would be Q&A across the session. So as I mentioned, it should be an interactive session and not kind of like me being an orator, right? So feel free to ask any questions. And also at the end, we would open some time if you have some additional questions which were not covered in, so that we can talk more about some specific questions you have. So yeah, so I think the first topic on the agenda is like we would talk about how we run Elastic on cloud and talk more about in details of the challenges, what results we are looking at, and what do we do to mitigate those challenges, right? Then we will talk a little bit on Azure native integration, of how we have seamlessly integrated with Azure, and talk through the advantages we get over there. And at the end, we will talk about what's new with Elastic, so that you get a sense of where we are heading towards and what's in store in the future as well. And there would be some demos in between to show what we talk about. So let's start with Elastic Cloud. So we have been experienced in operating Elasticsearch as a service because that's how we started. We have almost a decade kind of like experience doing that. And over the years, we have expanded to include more and more capabilities and bring in more solutions into Elastic, right? So if you look at or go back to Elastic history, you would realize or think more about us as a search company where we used to provide an API you can build in within your website, right? Or you can build some native experiences. But now we have moved towards more on the solution side where we have three top solutions, which are observability, enterprise search, and security. And within that, we have various verticals, which we kind of like move into from a solution point of view, right? Best part, all of those solutions are run under the common stack or a platform, right? And the beauty is if you learn a solution, you don't need to learn or unlearn anything else because the rest of all the solutions work on very similarly to the way we do, right? So you just need to find in the new capabilities and you already have the data which you are ingesting, right? So you just need to ingest some additional data and you can do whatever wonders you're trying to do, right? As we are more focusing on the infrastructure part, so just kind of like giving some tidbits of what we do and where we are, right? So we have thousands of clusters which are running on a cloud ecosystem. We have expanded and we offer 54 regions across cloud providers, which means that you can choose whatever region you want to launch your Elastic services in. And we tend to keep it updated as and when we can, right? So over the last 6 months, we have introduced 6 more regions. So that shows you the pace of how we're trying to add and anticipate where our customers want, right? And we will talk more about that, like how do we choose building out a region and what kind of feedback mechanisms we have to prioritize that, right? In addition to that, we are cloud agnostic. So we are saying that whatever cloud you want to choose, you can go and choose that. You can deploy your service. If you want to change cloud providers, you can do that. We don't have a forcing function to keep you on one cloud or the other, right? Currently, we run on top the major three cloud providers, which is not in any specific order, AWS, Azure, and Google. But then you have the option to choose wherever you want to be, right? So all the flexibility is at your hands, right? We want to be where you are. So with that, let's dive into some of the things we want to talk about. So this in general is a shared responsibility, which we kind of like want to portray like what users are responsible for and what Elastic is responsible for, right? So there are tons of things on this slide. And if you want to talk about just this slide, we can talk hours and hours and discussing each and everything, right? But we want to focus on very specific things as part of this section. So I would focus on what we are trying to discuss over here. So as I was mentioning that we would talk something more specific on the shared responsibility. And we want to talk about what we do at Elastic so that you get the comfort and you don't need to think about a lot of things, right? So one of the core components which people go unnoticed or which people don't realize kind of like forms the foundation is the infrastructure part. And infrastructure is kind of like more abstracted because we don't want you to think about infrastructure, right? We want you to think about your business use cases. We want you to think about your solutions. How do you want to build on top of Elastic, right? We don't want you to think about a lot of things we have over here, right? We don't want you to think about, hey, what instances should I use, right? We don't want you to think about like, hey, can I optimize a particular CPU, RAM, or disk ratio across clouds, right? We want you to make a simple solution. We want you to give you one single option so that you don't need to think twice or thrice whether my solutions would work best or not, right? So we would dive into all of these 4 individual topics so that you get a sense of where we are helping you out and how do we want to abstract things out so that you get more comfort in understanding that we don't want you to waste time which is not business critical for you, right? So we don't want you to waste time in anything which would not help you expand your use cases, right? So that's our goal and motive, right? So let's dive into it and let's look at the cloud regions and zones, right? So all of these slides would talk about 3 major topics, which are sectioned into what's a challenge. So challenge is, if you are a customer, what challenge do you have, right? Then we will talk about what we do at Elastic to solve that or mitigate that. And then there would be a last key takeaway of what's the end result of what we are doing and how it helps you, right? So let's start with regions across clouds, right? So if you go back in the history of each cloud provider, everyone has been using the terminology of regions and zones in a very different way, right? If you look at how many regions each cloud provider has, which is on the slide, you can see that Azure has more than 60 plus announced regions, right? AWS and GCP have more than 38 and 34 respectively, and they keep on increasing every day, every day, every day. Now, a challenge for you is like, how do I know which region I should launch into, right? How do I know which region would provide me the best performance, right? How do you know which region I should care about, right? And if you go into the maths of doing it across each CSP, then you would start figuring out like, hey, I'm spending a lot of time in doing something which I shouldn't care about, right? So with that challenge, what we do is like, we try to make things a bit more simpler, right? So we build out the Elastic Cloud by prioritizing the regions at our end so that you don't need to care about that, right? And how do we do that? We listen to what our customers want, right? So whether you reach out to us on any social media platform, whether it's Twitter, LinkedIn, or anywhere, we kind of like collate all the information what our customers are thinking about and kind of like look out at what our customers want, right? Because at the end, we want where our customers are, right? So any specific request you have, we always take that into consideration to understand where does our customers want their deployments to be in, right? But that's not the only criteria. We focus on customer demand, which is more internal and external both. We look at, are there any particular regions which are of strategic importance to us, right? For example, there are a lot of customers who may be in South America, right? And let's say none of the cloud provider has any region in South America. So those customers may be using North America as like the closest region. But then some of those applications are more latency driven and they're like, wish I had a region which was more closer to us, right? If we get those kind of signals, we work with CSPs to get a sense of when do they plan to launch a region which may be closer. And then we work backwards from that and ensure that do we have the right set of pipeline and demand for us to launch that. And with that, we kind of like work really closely to ensure that we follow the region as close to the GA of the cloud provider so that you don't need to wait years and months for that region to be available for you, right? If there are any regions which requires more on the GDPR side where you cannot move out your data from your country, we want to launch a region which can cater to you, right? So we keep on hearing and listening to the signals of which are the regions which we are missing and then kind of like look out for that, right? We manage all the regions and availability zones are available, right? So we want our solution to work where you get high availability and resiliency across the board, right? So we want to ensure that we are giving you an option so that you can choose whether you want to use a couple of AZs or 3 AZs or how much you want to kind of like build on the high availability, right? We don't want you to think whether the region I'm choosing would have high availability or not, right? So we do all the hard work at our end to ensure that we cater and filter to the basic needs and only provide you the options which are universally available across the board, right? So you don't need to kind of have a mental matrix that, hey, on one cloud provider, I have 3 zones. On another cloud provider with different region, I can only go up to 2 zones. Like that's not an experience we want, right? We want to give you a universal experience which spans across all cloud providers without any gotchas, right? So that's what we strive to. So as a result of this, what has happened is that we are publicly available in 54 regions across the world, and we are expanding month over month, day over day, whenever we get a chance, right? So to put into perspective, 2 years back, we were close to around 15 to 20 regions. In the last 2 years, we have grown almost like 2.5 to 3 times our region growth, right? Which showcases that we are very closely working where our customers want us to work, right? And obviously, there are many more regions planned in our ecosystem over the months. So let's talk about OS updates and security patches because this is a very common thing which everyone wants to ask us. Like, hey, we know we are using Elastic product. We are very happy with the way the product is working, but how do you maintain or how do you keep a track of things of what do you need to fix in your infrastructure, right? Whether there are OS updates, whether there are any patches which are happening on the security side, whether there are anything which is happening across the world which could impact our customers, right? And we don't want you to think about that. We don't want you to think about any incident via which you feel that, hey, wish my cluster was more secure, right? We want to ensure that we give you everything on the hood so that you get a better experience natively without even thinking about that, right? So with this challenge, what we do is like, we try to do some things, right? So we monitor what vulnerabilities are being launched, which would impact our systems. We monitor what are the bug fixes which are happening across the board in any of the software which we use. We monitor what are the patches are happening across the board so that we keep our infrastructure upgraded, right? And the best part of all that is we do all of these updates without anyone knowing that everything is being secure, right? So you don't see any downtime. You don't see anything weird with your cluster or the solutions where things were not working well, right? You won't see any glitch where while we were performing these updates, your system stopped working, right? So every day we keep on updating our ecosystem under the hood without any customer impact, right? And we want to strive this to kind of like reach and keep this at the momentum which we have, right? Because we don't want you to think about that, right? So what's the key result of that, right? So our infrastructure is always up to date with all the security patches and OS updates which happen across the board so that you have the mind of patience and you understand that this is not something which you need to think about, right? So we want to provide you the best experience. Now let's talk about some ratios of vCPU, RAM, and disk, right? And this would be a bit more technical because we will be talking something about instance types, right? So just to recap, if you're not familiar, so whenever you're running an instance on any cloud provider, you need to select a hardware profile or a hardware on which you need to run, right? So as a quiz, we have various instance types across each provider, right? So this is the first instance type graph for AWS, and this chart is not complete, right? This chart has been taken from a particular date, which is 6 months prior, right? If you look at this chart, it lists a lot of categories of instances, and then it has various generations of instances mentioned over there, right? Can anyone guess how many different or unique instance types that AWS has? Any guess? 50? Okay. Any other guess? 25? Anyone other in the multiple of 25 and 50? 99? So what if I say that you are way off and the actual number as of a couple of months ago was more than 400, right? So you have more than 400 options to think about which hardware should I use for your, right? So let's do similar trivia for other cloud providers to see what sense you have, right? This is an excerpt from GCP, right? Can anyone guess? And obviously you can look at the screen that there are 11 high-level generations, right? But can you guess how many combinations of different ratios you can create out of this? So if you have to cater and change your memory or vCPU, how many combinations are there on vCPU? Any guesses? 250, okay. Anyone else? Anyone on the Zoom who want to take a stab at that, given that AWS has 400? Okay, what if I say the options are limitless? And why? Because GCP uses a very different approach where they say that, hey, you can customize and input whatever vCPU's memory and disk you want, right? So you are not only looking at fixed ratios, you are looking at customized ratios. Now the question comes in like, how do I know which ratio is optimized for me, right? If you go into that rat hole, you can spend months and years of identifying the right instance for you, only on GCP, right? Not opening the bottleneck for AWS and Azure, right? And last but not the least, this is Azure. This is a bit simple because if you look at the graph, it shows all the instance generations which are, right? So without counting, anyone want to take a stab at what that is? That's close. So it has around 63 instance generations. Best part, 25 were added in the last 2 months, right? So if you look at, hey, Azure has launched 25 new instance generations, which has instance sizes of different ratios altogether within them. And you have a task like, how do I choose which is the right hardware for us to run, right? So you can imagine someone needs to spend a lot of time in identifying those and understanding first what does these even different generations mean, right? So with that sneak peek, I think the question is super clear, right? That virtual machines are everywhere, right? Pick any provider, you have so much homework to do, right? Can you test all VM sizes? Is there kind of like bandwidth you want to spend on something which you know doesn't make any direct impact or any add-on value to your business? Can you keep track of what's being launched across all cloud providers? Can you keep a track whether new architecture is being created or whether a new generation is available which would improve the performance, right? How do you determine which series to test? How do you determine which CPU generation to test? For example, Intel has Cascade Lake, they introduced Ice Lake. How do you become aware that what performance benefits you get, right? You don't want to trust any random benchmark which just says like, hey, this is better than the previous one, right? Because you want to benchmark and validate the solutions you're running to ensure that those solutions are optimal, right? How do you know whether you need storage with the compute or do you need different kind of persistent storage, right? How do you kind of think about all of these questions? And the biggest question is, should you think about this if it's not a direct value to your business? And this is where the beauty lies in, right? So what we do is like, we scan these data points every day. We look out every day what's being launched across the board. We look out months in advance by working with each cloud provider to understand what they are launching, right? At the end, our goal is that we want to provide you a particular hardware on which we have tested Elasticsearch and all the solutions under which our platform is built works extensively well in a way you would want it to be, right? So we do all the hard work for you. We just give you options that, hey, based on our understanding and based on our performance benchmarking, this is what you should choose, right? And I will just give you a quick story of how all this started, right? Because we didn't have so many options and we don't want to expose hundreds of options, right? So we just have 4 options to give you some perspective, right? So 4 options on each cloud provider, which means that we have abstracted all the limitless and 400 plus options to give you just 4 options, right? And the story is pretty simple. We started with a particular ratio of vCPU RAM which worked really well for us, right? And customer says like, hey, this works really well, but I need more vCPUs because I'm getting bottlenecked on my CPU, right? And we are like, okay, how much more do you want? And they're like, how much more you can give us? And we were like, hey, we can give you hundreds of options. He's like, I don't, right? So what we did is like, we added more vCPUs by testing various combination across cloud providers and come up with a ratio which we feel is more appropriate for the customer, right? And then the customer says like, hey, now I have the right vCPUs, I have the right RAM, I need more storage. But to need more storage, I don't need to pay for RAM or vCPUs more, right? Because I just want more storage, right? So then when we went back to the board, explored all the options and came up with a particular type where you get more and more storage without kind of like incrementing your RAM or vCPUs to lower your cost, right? And again, customer says like, I need more vCPUs. You are giving me less vCPUs. I need like the maximum you can give us, right? And we went all the hunting, doing all the legwork, and we kind of like finalized and came up with 4 concrete set of hardware profiles which we feel is appropriate for all the 3 solutions, right? So we don't want you to give you 4 different options for each solution. We want to give you 4 options which work unanimously across each solution so that you only think once and then you know all your other solutions would work the same way, right? So as a result, what happens is like we offer 1 instance type per use case. There is no confusion at all for you, right? We don't want you to bombard with hundreds of options and you spend your time clicking the drop box and saying, okay, 10 options, which should I choose, right? No confusion. We don't want any confusion of any type. And the best part, we always keep on looking out for what our cloud providers are bringing in and automatically introduce new hardware profiles for you, right? So we still keep one best instance type. We just keep on upgrading based on generation and CPU architecture so that you get the best price performance, right? So we always are on the lookout to give you better performance at a lower price point, right? With that, we have an interesting question on capacity, right? Which everyone feels that, hey, it's cloud. I would have unlimited capacity, right? Why should I care about that? And then when you go to your cloud journey, you start realizing that, hey, I need 10,000 servers and no cloud provider can provide me because they say they are limitless, but in actual, they're not allowing me to do that. And if you think about that, your production system requires 10x scale in 4 days, right? You go on saying to cloud, I need, they say, yeah, keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. You would get it one day or the other, right? You ask them, when would I get it? And they would say, yeah, it would be days, weeks, or months, but we can't guarantee you, right? So it happens that we realize that cloud is not as infinite as we thought it would be, right? So the challenge is like, how do you ensure when you are clicking on anything which you want, you're not getting an error which says like no capacity available, right? So we want to ensure that you don't land into that challenge, right? So what we do first, basic, we try that you don't get into that situation, right? So that's why I started my talk with saying that if you ever go to our Elastic service, click on create deployment and get an error, then I'm the person to be blamed, right? How we do that, we collaborate with CSPs on a daily basis to understand what are your limits which we need to think about, right? If we think about that, we might be hitting our limits. We kind of like work around different and unique solutions to ensure that our customers don't get impacted by that, right? We work on a future forecasting where we work years in advance to understand that when would we get bottleneck? Would it be in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, right? So that we have enough time to kind of like understand what improvements do we need to make, right? And then we are always on the lookout to ensure that none of these things happen, right? So there are a lot of kind of like things which go around, but the best part is that we don't want you to take this kind of like understanding, saying that, hey, I'm trying Elastic, I need more capacity because my production systems need it, and then you are saying we can't give you, right? So we want to be very careful and we work really closely to ensure that never happens, right? And as a result, this is the best experience you could get to use Elastic solution in cloud, right? So we strive really hard to ensure that these stockouts are like almost 0% of the time, right? And we work really hard to ensure that we have the right tools to identify well in advance if those are some of the things which could impact us, right? So with that, I know there's a lot of jargon which I kind of like talked about, but I want to quickly talk about that. There are a lot more things we do under the hood, right? And if you look at the Elastic Signal, there are two more major categories, which are orchestration and platform and networking, right? So we do a lot more just apart this, but we don't want you to think about that, right? So with that, before I go for a demo, I want to see if anyone has any questions or if anyone want to ask something. Yeah. Yeah, so I think like there are various, so there are various themes to think about that, right? So first, we don't want our solution architects and salespeople at Elastic always thinking about like, hey, I'm trying to sign a deal. Would Elastic have the capacity to support that, right? We don't want anyone else to kind of like think about that. We want you to go do your job and leave everything at the rest of the team so that we can all excel the ways we want, right? But obviously, if essays or anyone internally or even externally kind of like talk about like, hey, we are at a particular scale and we anticipate that we would grow way quickly than a general growth. then obviously we would talk more in details of what does it mean for you, right? Is it an organic growth or a exponential growth, which you think is it really an exponential growth for us? Because we have a lot of ML models which we run in the background to understand what our capacity forecast would be, right? We buffer a lot of organic growth. We buffer a lot of customer growth. We buffer a lot of additional parameters to get an understanding of when will we get bottleneck, right? So that's why we don't have a way where we want to tell every customer that this is a problem you need to be concerned about, right? So we want to abstract all of those things from any customer and even internal folks, right? So that's why you would see very specific teams at Elastic knowing about all of those things, because we don't want this to kind of like worry everyone that, hey, this is an additional thing I need to think about, right? So does that answer the question? Oh, exactly. And that's what we want to kind of like portray, that these are the things you shouldn't care about. You should just think that all of these would work, because we are working on all of those things under the hood to make sure that you get the best experience. Cool. So I will do a quick demo, because I don't want to kind of like take everyone's time. But I just want to show the things which I talked about, right? So this is the Elastic Cloud Portal. I clicked on create a deployment because this is what you want at the bare end, right? So as I said that we are cloud agnostic, you can choose whatever provider you have. So I think this is a specialized account, so we don't see other cloud providers, but in general, you would see all the options of GCP, AWS, and Azure, right? Oh, that could be a good one. Just kidding, right? Then we talked about regions, right? So we talked about that each cloud provider has different regions. So here you get a quick view of the regions which we have made available for our service across Azure in this case, right? So you can go select any particular region you want to choose, which fits your business needs, right? Then we talk about hardware profile, where we kind of like say that, hey, we just provide you one best instance which we feel is for your solution, right? So you can see there are a lot of jargon around here talking about what's the general use case. And based on the use case, you can particularly choose a template which works for you, right? So this is kind of like driven by the semantics mentioned over here, but it's also driven by a lot of sizing and performance testing you do, because all of the unique use cases have very different kind of like experiences, because all unique use cases have different requirements across the board, right? So we give you one best option across, and we keep the same options on each cloud provider, so that if you know on one cloud provider a particular setting is working, then you don't need to retest everything or rethink about anything. You can choose another cloud provider, same profile, and you would get similar performance, right? At the end, what we do is the version. So we kind of like showcase what all versions are there in Elastic Cloud, which goes back to a lot of versions. Yeah. So at the end, what happens, what we encapsulated in all the 4 slides, you click on create deployment and the magic happens, right? Where the deployment is created, you get what you want, and it all covers the 4 big slides I kind of like covered around, right? So with that, I want to kind of like go back to the presentation, go back into the slideshow mode, and see. So yeah, I skipped the demo slide. I didn't remember that I had a demo slide before I kind of like showed the demo, right? So with that, I would pass the baton so that we can talk more about the other topics that we have highlighted. So with that, I would give it to Hemant. You to take more.
Thanks, Yuvi. Shankar, can you confirm if you can hear me all right?
Yes, Hemant, loud and clear.
Yeah, so as Yuvi already talked about how much goes into creating this Elastic as a service that customers and users can consume so that they can focus more on their use case and the value that they are looking to derive. From that data set, about 18 months ago, we started taking a look at what else can we do for the users, depending on which cloud provider are they choosing to deploy their Elastic. And that's where the Elastic and Microsoft partnership the Azure native integration is sort of result of that brainstorming and what can we do more for users who are choosing Azure as their strategic cloud provider and also leveraging Elastic. What can we do together by bringing the engineering resources to enhance that experience? So there were three tenets of this conversation, and you will see some of that in the demo. One is the discoverability of Elastic in Azure. So if I am an Azure user and that's where I deploy my workloads on, how can I find Elastic? Once I find it, lifecycle management was the second aspect of it. What can we do as Microsoft and Elastic as a partner to bring that experience to the next level where what the users are familiar with when they are operating in an Azure ecosystem, they can also take the same tools and lens onto their Elastic workloads in Azure as well. The third component has been focused on data onboarding, and until now, most of the focus has been observability aspect of it. Like if you are leveraging Elastic on Azure to observe your Azure resources, together as partners, we have introduced some integrations to make that onboarding of that data easy from the Azure resources into Elastic. So I don't have a lot of slides. I just thought I'll quickly spend some time in what this focus translates into for the end users. So I hope this is visible enough for the folks in the room, but right now I am in Azure portal, and that's where a lot of the Azure users are spending their time. And granted, a lot of the workload, once they are taken into production, a lot of that gets automated, but Azure portal is still a very, very much in use sort of portal into the Azure ecosystem where folks come in, discover the services that Azure provides or the partners provide and work with them. So this is where the discoverability kicks in. If you are interested in Elastic on Azure, you would notice that Elasticsearch shows up as any other Azure service would do. Since I work quite a bit with Elastic on Azure, you would notice here it is listed under Azure services. And this is the discoverability aspect of Elastic. This is the native integration aspect where somebody who's leveraging Elastic on Azure, the idea of the partnership is to give them the same native experience as they get with whether it's an Azure virtual machine or any other Azure resource. Once you discover Elastic, the next step is obviously to create some deployment. We already have few created, but I'll continue just to showcase what that experience looks like. If you are a user on Azure, this would look very familiar to how you would create a new virtual machine on Azure. So same, picking up the resource group where you would want this to be deployed, giving a resource name, picking up one of the 16 regions that we support as UV earlier talked quite in length in how many regions we support across cloud providers. This is the 16 regions that are available worldwide within the Azure. From here onwards, you move to the next step, and this is where, if you remember the slide, the data onboarding aspect. So if someone is deploying Elastic on Azure and their key use case is observability, one of our solutions, or security for that matter, they can easily check the subscription activity log just to understand what has been happening in my Azure subscription, or platform or resource logs, which you have the ability to exclude or include based on the interest that you have in which data sources. From here onwards, the experience is very similar. It will validate based on the integration. And once that's done, I can quickly go ahead and click on create. So as this is creating, so this is where the handoff has happened from Azure portal. This native integration has handed it off to Elastic Cloud, the service that we talked about. And you would notice that I did not have to step out of Azure portal to create an Elastic deployment that now will be tied to my subscription. So this is the native experience aspect of this effort and partnership. I'm not going to wait for it. It's going to take a couple of minutes. I'm not going to wait for it. Just take all of us to an existing deployment. Again, once the deployment is created as an Azure user, I am still looking at my Azure portal where I spend a lot of my time in. This is where we surface some information and some configurations that users can further take action on. If I still need to go and do some advanced settings, there is the ability to click on Manage Elastic Cloud. This will take me to Elastic Cloud, and this is another aspect of native experience, the seamless integration between Azure portal and Elastic Cloud. So even though the identities are managed separately, but a single sign-on experience is provided, so you don't have to manage them. So once this is logged in, this would look very similar to what UV was just showing, the Elastic Cloud Console. Let me go back to highlight another integration that's part of this native experience. If you are looking to observe or protect your Azure resources, Azure Virtual Machines is usually on the top of that list for most Azure users. This is where you can pick up your virtual machines that you're interested in observing or protecting, install this Elastic extension, and once it's done installing, it will start shipping the data to Elastic Cloud or the Elastic deployment in Elastic Cloud. Again, you're doing a lot more than just lifecycle management of Elastic. Now you're actually onboarding your data that's of interest to you. So this native integration is delivered on the Azure Marketplace. So that's the delivery platform for it. And then there are other aspects of it, like you can do configurations such as monitoring this deployment, or if you have private link configuration, which Elastic Cloud does support the private link, or I think Google calls it private service connect. All of them are supported if that's your preferred mechanism of interacting with Elastic deployed in one of the cloud providers. Once this information has started flowing into the deployment, I can go back and just to showcase what that end experience looks like. From the overview page, I can go to my Kibana URL, and this will again be enabled with the single sign-on. And I have enabled the private link. Well, I can quickly show you how easy it is to enable or disable a private link. So I can go to my deployment. In the security, there is a traffic filter where I have enabled the Azure private link. So let me take that off. Right. So what you see in your resource group, so just for the folks on Zoom, the question was, when I created the deployment happened in a resource group. So why would the private link be required since your resource group is already part of your virtual network? So what you see in the resource group, it's the metadata about the Elastic deployment. It's not the actual deployment. So the Elastic deployment is still getting deployed into Azure infrastructure that Elastic manages, which means our VNet. And that's why the private link connectivity is important to users. So what you see in the resource group, that's more just metadata about the deployment. Does that answer the question? So I just took off the private link traffic filter that I had, and hopefully now it should be able to single sign on into Kibana. So I'm just moving into Discover app within Kibana. So this is where I can look at all my logs and data that exist in Elastic and work with it. So this is where you would notice that it has been sending the logs and resources that I've picked up for this deployment earlier. This is usually the starting point for users. As you would imagine, Kibana has been established as a very popular visualization and alerting tool as well. So I was just highlighting the end-to-end experience for the users. It's like when you start shipping that data from the Azure, I was just highlighting within Kibana how they can easily start working with that data, whether it's searching on it or start to visualize it. So I'm right now in the Kibana lens, and this is where if you're looking at Kibana after a while, you would realize that Kibana lens has sort of been that step that we took a while ago to take off all the learning that's involved from a new visualization tool that you're now experiencing if this is the first time you're interacting with Kibana. And what we do here is we take a very opinionated approach based on the data which you are an expert on, based on the data that you have selected. We'll make recommendations based on the best suited visualizations that you can do. And if there are multiple ways to visualize it, we will also recommend those. Not to get deep into this, but this is if you haven't explored Kibana Lens, which could be the case if you've been leveraging Kibana for a while or Elastic for a while and used to the Kibana visualizations. I would highly recommend for a lot of the users, this has been a huge improvement now that they don't have to be experts on what Kibana visualizations can do for them. Kibana sort of takes as data first approach, and that's how it guides you. With this, if there are any questions, I am more than happy to take it. Else, Shankar, I can hand over the control to you, and maybe you can run it from your.
Yeah, sure. Well, we can just continue with the slides if you wanted to. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, perfect. Sounds good. Can you hear me okay? All right. So my part is pretty quick here. We are going to talk about the new features in the 8.0 or 8.1 and 8.3 upcoming. So Elastic has this, the smaller version release probably every 6 to 8 weeks, and the major version release probably in about 18 months to 24 months cycle. Now we do these kind of events of showing what is new and what is relevant to you and how it can be done and stuff like that to all our customers on a regular basis whenever we have a major release shown up. So in this version 8.2, I'm not too sure if you're well versed with the other versions, but certain features has been we have created a couple of features which are going to solve a set of problems. Let's see what are those. Can you go to the next slide now? All right. So the idea, Hemant and UV were talking about is how fast we can onboard you directly from Azure and how quickly we can see all the data in a single pane of glass. And what are the other features which actually can help you, not just navigate within the but also make some meaningful representation of the data and things like that. So if you can go to the next slide. First, I would like to start with two kinds of monitoring here. There is when it comes to performance monitoring, there are two different monitoring. One is proactive monitoring. The other one is reactive monitoring. If you look at the application performance monitoring, it's more on a reactive monitoring sector. And to have a proactive monitoring, to proactively monitor your applications, your click path, your user behavior, and things like that, synthetic monitoring is the right tool. Now, Elastic has come up with a synthetic monitoring solution where you actually can record a user click path based on your marketing research or based on your existing data, and then you can execute that particular execution across different geographical location. That's going to give you the performance and the availability for a specific set of use cases across regions proactively. Now, if you look at the application performance monitoring, there has to be some traffic which comes in based on that the APM would generate the data. But the synthetics is going to do a synthetic robotic execution of the measurement and then give you the measurement output in terms of performance and availability. Now it is already available with a newer version. So let's go to the next slide. So you can pretty much do all the applications. It could be the application within your firewall. It could be an internet application. It could be your say your infrastructure. All of those can be monitored using a script. So if you go to the next slide here. Now you may ask why. How does it matter? So basically, if you look at the Elastic homepage, we have only 73 of the 365 requests which is passed from the first party. The rest is all from third party and different things. So if you wanted to understand, if you want to filter out the third party elements and just understand the performance of the first party, or if you wanted to have a combination of all the records, in a single output and try to understand my performance of my page in different geographical locations. Synthetic monitoring matters to you. Now, what is new? Let's go to the next slide. You don't have to install any thick client on your computer to record a script. It's all browser based. So you can just go ahead and use the regular browser to record a script. It's just like a point and shoot, just point and click. The script is generated for you. And then you can execute the script on a deep observability integration into that. And then once that is done, the data can be correlated with your application performance data. So if there is a performance issue which is coming out from the synthetic world, you can also correlate that to the real world and try to understand what is actually causing problem, or what is going to be the problem for the users in the next 1 hour, or maybe in the near future. So that's kind of thing. We were talking about synthetic monitoring. So let's go to the next feature we're talking about. So spans. Spans is a very interesting topic when it comes to the application performance monitoring. Now, these spans can contain information about the execution of a specific code path. Now, they measure from the start all the way to the end of that particular activity or a set of activity. And then we call it, and it'll come with a parent-child relationship with the specific set of activities, right? Now, these the Elastic agents will automatically instrument a variety of libraries to capture all these spans within your applications. And you can also use, our agent API for any custom instrumentation or any specific code path and stuff like that. And you can imagine of, bringing all the execution information into a single span, or a set of span, as you see on the image. Now, the problem is there might be a billion execution in your system, and it's going to create a chaos when you wanted to view all the data in a single place. So we have to have some sort of mechanism by which we can compress a smart way of compressing everything and then showing it in a way that it can make some sense to the human being. At the same time, it can make some sense to the analytical engine. So that's exactly what we have accomplished with the compressed spans here. Now, this is also available on general availability right now with the 8.2. So if you go ahead and start using the cloud 8.2 version, it's already available there. So let's go to the next screen, and we should be able to see how it's being done. So the image on the left shows hundreds of spans, right? And it is converted to a meaningful span on the right side. Now, once you enable this span compression feature, now this span compression, it can really reduce the collection or the processing and the storage overhead, because that's going to be really heavy if you try to store all of it. Even if it's in a blob storage, it's going to cost you a fortune, right? Now, there should be a trade-off for this, of course. So the trade-off is, say, for example, if there is a DB statement, it won't be completely collected, or it can be completely collected, but it won't be completely shown here. So, but if you wanted to insist on that, you may as well go ahead and do that. That's the idea here. All right. So can we go to the next screen? Perfect. OpenTel, that's a very hot topic currently, which I'm seeing with all the major CSPs, or any companies, any software company for that matter. If they wanted to do some monolith to, say, microservices architecture, OpenTel is the go-to place where it can actually collect the information. Now, OpenTel does that really well. Now, the question is, can we integrate that to Elastic and make sense into the Elastic application performance monitoring data? So that's why we have this OpenTelemetry Bridge. Now, this bridge will allow you to create Elastic, basically integrate all the data which is being collected by the OpenTel, and then integrate that into the transactions and the span. And that is done using an OpenTel API. Now, Elastic is all about API. So you can pretty much consume all the data from OpenTel using this bridge, and then put it into context within the Elastic ecosystem. Now, there may be some manual instrumentation which you have to do on the OpenTel API, and that can be adapted to the Elastic APM Java client. And, the instrumentation is done that way. Now, how do you see that? Well, we already saw the span. Now, the first span needs to be converted to the Elastic APM transaction, and the subsequent spans are already mapped to your Elastic APM span, and that's how it works. So this is again a new feature which is live on the 8.2. So I just have 3 more quick topics. I know it's already late. Just 3 more minutes, or maybe 4 minutes. I'll try to finish it. Tail-based sampling. So by default, every application performance monitoring vendor does a they call it hit-based, and we also have, by default, we do the distributed tracing using the head-base. However, we have this tail-based approach right now. The idea is to get you a faster solution, and to have a determined output, you use a tail-based sampling as well. So this way you can estimate the kind of storage, the amount of storage you need for your tail-based sampling of all the APM data. And next slide, please. Okay, support for Kibana spaces and APM. Right. So Kibana has something like a namespace kind of thing, which is, you can specify that. Now, this will enable you to organize your dashboards and, your saved objects into meaningful categories, say for dev, or for pre-prod, or for prod, or, for DevOps, or whatever it is. You can have different organized way. And that is, we call it a Kibana space, and that is specifically available with APM right now with this recent version. And the last one is alerting. So let's go to the next slide. Alerting. Right. So when we basically, so the thing is, you're still going to, okay, say for example, you get an alert, you go to the alerting page, you look at that alert, and you see that the alert is making a lot of sense. Now, maybe after, say, 6 months from now, the alert might not make complete sense to you because, with a newer version of the software, it might be faster or it might be slower, a lot of moving parts there. So if it's not making any sense, you want to make some changes, or, you are troubleshooting something, you don't have to go all the way to a different screen to make changes. You can still stay on the same page and then make all the changes and just execute it there, right there. So this is again a new feature in the 8.2. And that's basically, we wanted to keep you very, just building a context around your editing of all the rules and things like that. That's it. So that's pretty much it from my side. And thank you. Any questions around the observability, we can quickly talk.